We reviewed every Elijah Craig barrel proof that we could get our hands on. Now, we didn't get to review all of them because we don't have our hands on all of them, but there were 21 to 23 different batches that we are going to go over the course of this review. As we go through that, we will then tier the batches to say which ones are the standout batches, and then ultimately, what did we learn about each year and that overall decline that some people feel about Elijah Craig barrel proof. So thank you for joining me today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining everybody for another Tuesday discussion. Here on Tuesdays, we do like to respond to questions and comments that we are getting from our wonderful Patreon community, YouTube comments, or Instagram comments. So if you have anything that you'd like us to do or challenge us with, or questions you'd like us to ask on future weeks, hey, you know where to let us know. Now, this one is coming from a good whiskey friend, Wise Guy Stu. He asked us to do this probably 8 months ago at this point, and we have been working on it behind the scenes ever since, challenging ourselves to score all of the Elijah Craig barrel proof batches that we could. And I'll be honest, there were some of these that were essentially just in my bunker, sealed. And as I went through the map and tried to figure out which batches we had, which batches we didn't have, if I had it, that thing was getting open. And unfortunately for my cabinet over here, there are now 20 different batches opened in this house. It does make for a fun time, though. But going through that, you know how we roll on this channel. We like to score everything pretty darn meticulously. So I've got a combination of reviews from myself, from Darrell, from Kelsey, got to aggregate those into yearly averages. And ultimately, it does bring some good insights that I'd like to share with everybody. And I think they do reflect how people feel about the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof brand. So first off, we do just extensive scoring when it comes to whiskeys on this channel. If you have seen our format with reviews, we have 10 different metrics that we grade every review, every whiskey on a scale of 0 to 10. Essentially, a average whiskey would net out around a 70. A good whiskey is like an 80. A great whiskey is an 85. And then once you start getting into the 90s, it's like unicorn status. And that helps us then, as we walk through each of the batches, to understand what was the vibe of that year. So I'm going to go through this particular side of things pretty quickly, just so you can see the metrics going on behind the scenes. But starting out with a pirate bottle, I got that one here behind me. I am running thin, but this is specifically batch 10. This is the only one of the pre-2017 batches that I have and that Darrell has scored as well. But quite frankly, this is one of my favorite whiskeys of all time. And as you can see, it is also Darrell's favorite whiskey too. He gave this one a 98. I gave it a 95. So when you see the D, when you see the J, when you say the K, that just stands for Darrell, Jeff, or Kelsey. But that is the only bit of evidence that we do have about the pirate batches. When I talk to people about the pre-2017 batches, though, I do know that there are some variations, just as there is today. And I've heard from quite a few people that the batch 10 is one of the best, if not the best. So then in 2017, missed the A117. I've been trying to get that for so long, and then just said, we're going to record this video. I can backfill it later. But the B batch and the C batch both got 87s from Darrell and I. Same thing, missed the A118, but the B batch got an 85 and the C batch got an 89 from me. Then you can see things escalate come 2019. The A batch both scored in the 90s for both Durrell and I. The B batch 87, and then the C batch back up into the 90s. Now, to think about that, I mean, if you watch us on this channel, there's not too many things that have scored in the 90s. And especially at the time, this would have been a $65 bottle, even though it's an 85, 80, 85, $90 bottle now. It was probably 65 when I was getting these back in 2019. Excellent, excellent whiskey. And that's, of course, one of the things that this reputation is built upon when you have a year like that. We'll get to that later. In 2020, ranges mostly in those mid 80s. I particularly do like the B520, but Durrell was a bit different on that one. And then him and I flip flop on the C batch that you can see there too. Then everything takes a step back in 2021 after all of those epic scores on the first 5 rows. Now we're getting into scores even dipping into the higher 70s. Now, the interesting one for me is the C921. I've actually got that one right here in front of me. I actually poured out some of these that I could sample along the way as I'm talking to them. But Durrell and I were quite distant on this one. An 8-point difference is actually kind of rare for us. Typically, we're somewhere in a ±4 on nearly everything that we review. I'm going to dip into this one real quick. See, I love that still. I got to sit down with Durrell on this one, go through the flavor notes. I mean, I was getting a blast of fruit there, the oak that I love, whipping me through vanilla and some chocolate too, almost like a Wendy's chocolate frosty. I'm good with my score on that one. But yeah, I don't know what rubs him the wrong way on the 79. And that's the type of things that we will spend forever talking about. And it helps us too then when we go on to barrel picks, if we have those type of communications up front to see what hits somebody the wrong way and what hits somebody the right way. I like the C batch though. Then in 2022, the trend mostly continues, scores in the lower 80s, even getting into the higher 70s. Little bit of a bounce back when it came to 2023, and we get some Kelsey action in here too. But really, 2023 was all about that C batch there. You know, that one comes up in the 90s. That one held up the whole year. And then the other one I have in this other column was a fill your own bourbon experience at Heaven Hill Distillery. Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is one of the batches. Essentially, they do smaller batchings of those. So this one was the Y723, which just stands for the You Do You Bourbon Experience. I think I get that right. I say something different every time I say it out loud. But it's like the You Do Bourbon Experience. I just did something different. And the 7 stands for July 2023. They told us that essentially every 2 to 3 months, there's a new batch for that experience. That was awesome. That would have been my second favorite batch last year. And then the last year that we have here, 2024. Yeah, starting out on a ho-hum note, right? Durrell had this one in the lower 70s. Or higher 70s. I had it in the lower 80s. I actually got it right in front of me here. The nose is pretty good. It's a good whiskey. It comes across flat, though I'm getting a good amount of, gosh, it's the oak that's different on this one. I think that's what rubs Durrell and I the wrong way. But I'll get into that in just a moment because I got some characteristics here and I got a little flight laid out. So what you can do with all this then is aggregate our scores and come up with a score for the year, which was the thing that Stu actually challenged us to do, and to see which years popped and which years were ho-hum. Now, even ho-hum in Elijah Craig terms for a bottle that cost $65, $80, $90, still pretty good if it's hitting up in the 80s. So ho-hum is still good. But this is really showing you what the reputation of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is built upon. It is built upon those consecutive years of those pirate bottles, of the killer batches that consistently came out in 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. That is 5 years that I'm essentially showing here of incredible whiskeys on average across all those batches. And that is it. That's why people love this brand. Now, look at what happened in 2021 and 2022, though. That is where it started breaking people's faith a little bit when things are then consistently scoring more in the 80s, then into the 85, 88s, 90s type status of the years prior. Now, 2023 was a comeback year, though it was a comeback year held up specifically by one batch, the C923, and we're not going to get into micro batches or laser codes or anything of that today. But back down, though, with the beginning of 2024, starting in the 80s, like what happened in 2021 and 2022. So, totally interesting to me. When you hear people describe how great Elijah Craig is, especially if they have been in this hobby for over a decade, that is it on the screen. You see it right there. That is what they're thinking of, is that multi-year period where Elijah Craig was consistently a standout whiskey, and now it's getting a little inconsistent. So hopefully we get a standout batch this year and we don't kind of teeter on the edge like we did in 2021, 2022. Now, another way to look at this then is to rank the tiers and put them into the status here where S is the top, F is the lowest one. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly here because this will lead to a concept that I want to do on the channel probably in the next couple of weeks. But I've got some of them laid out here so that I can articulate what I'm mainly seeing now when I see them, in this tiered fashion. So I'm not going to put anything in the F tier. There is no bad Elijah Craig barrel proof, frankly. But E's, there are a couple E's. Now, note the dates on all of these. By the last two digits in the year, you got 2021, 2022, 2024, all coming from those years that had the lower averages and all coming from years very recent, not in the sub 2020 range. Now, even when we step up to D, once again, we're still dealing with 2021 batches and 2022 batches. Now, with the C batch, step up there a little bit. We've got the B518, the C920, the A123, and the B523. So once again, last year, those other two batches, they were still good. Really held up, though, by what happened with the C923. Then really where we get the coupling going on is with this B range right here. That's where most of them do fall. We are talking about scores essentially between 85 and 88 on average, but that's where most of the batches do fall, which then leaves us with 4 batches left in this A tier and S tier. In the A tier, the A119, the C919, and the C923. And then at S, it's that batch 10. It's that pirate bottle. That thing is something special. Once again, I rated that one a 95. Durrell gave that thing a 98. Now, as we step through this, I've got some whiskeys here laid out in front of me. I poured A123 as the E tier, A120, which would be an example of, let's see here, a B tier, and C919, which would be the example of an A tier. Just to give you a quick articulation of even what I'm seeing here, I was nosing through these right before I started hitting record, and it makes sense. They do step through each other here. So on the A124, even on the nose, there's kind of a lack of depth. There's a flatness to it. And then as you get into the A120, the fruits brighten up, the sweetness gets dialed up, the oak dials up as well. And then you go into the C919. Yeah, and that one's just gorgeous. Just absolutely gorgeous. There's like cherry cola and the oak and these fruits and sweetness. Bit of fried dough and powdered sugar. Cheesy Pete, this thing I could bury my nose into the C919 for days. And I think the same thing kind of translates to the palate here. So starting out with the A124, yeah, I mean, there's just a general flatness on the flavors. The flavors themselves are good. They're just flat. Going into the A12, ooh, that one pops. The rich caramel really comes through on that one compared to the flat flavors of the A124. Oh, geez. And then the C919 is just absolutely gorgeous. The oak, it comes across even older, much older than 12 years. The level of fruits on it, once again, those baked goods. Oh, geez. Finish goes on for days. Perfectly cheering them there. That was a fun exercise. That proves it right there. Oh my gosh, that C919 won't stop. That is so good. So now what this leads to is going to be a blind flight coming up when we do a Whiskey Wednesday live. Time to compare batch 10, A119, C919, and C923 to see which one of those actually stands out as the best and see if that batch 10 does stick out above the crowd as much as we think it does. But hopefully this helps kind of show that trajectory of Elijah Craig a little bit, especially using the data. A lot of people could probably articulate that they felt that, but to see it in data, I think is a bit different, especially when you see how different those average scores can be, off by 5 points, even 10 points for some of those years. But ultimately, what we got to hope for is that even though Elijah Craig A124 is a bit of a ho-hum release compared to prior batches, still a good whiskey. I could still just crush this thing. It's just good for the price versus like being something special that we expect from Elijah Craig. And the other thing that I forgot to point out as we were going through that, the one thing that really stuck out to me too was how correlated proof and score was. The higher proof batches, for the most part, stood out compared to the ones that hover around that 120 range or even dip below it. Those are the ones that typically come across flat. So what I got to hope is that Elijah Craig, Heaven Hill, continues to respect this brand and not play too much with the age statements now that they're dipping below the 12 years. You know, it's one of those things, like this is one of the main things I look forward to every single release. But, you know, the faith was waning a little bit after 2021 and 2022. And now the way that 2024 started, you bought me back into the game with that C batch in 2023, but that faith is only going to go so far. Hopefully they continue to make this a special release rather than playing off the brand name and, you know, carrying those bottles to other releases. So that concludes the thoughts on Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. If you've done anything resembling this, or if you have any opinions of what your favorite batches are, let us know in the comments and stay posted here for when we do this blind. I got to figure out which special guest to get on for this particular blind, but that's going to be a fun night. So thank you for joining today, Whiskey Friends. We'll catch you on the next Tuesday discussion. Goodbye, everybody.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you